David Perdue, the next U.S. ambassador to China. Some attack his record outsourcing jobs to Asia while others point to his hawkish rhetoric on China. How will David shape U.S. relations with China? 1. David Perdue's background, outsourcing jobs and ties to Asia. When you think about David Perdue's career before politics, imagine someone who worked at the nerve center of the global economy, sitting in boardrooms, making decisions that rippled across the world. He wasn't just crunching numbers or signing contracts. He was leading major companies like Reebok and Dollar General during the 1990s and 2000s, a time when businesses were looking to Asia, particularly China, for opportunities to cut costs and increase profits. For companies like Reebok, it wasn't just about selling shoes, it was about finding the most efficient way to make them. During his tenure as a senior executive, Perdue helped oversee operations that relied heavily on China's manufacturing sector. Back then, China was becoming the workshop of the world, offering cheap labor and a vast network of factories. It was the perfect storm for global businesses to shift production overseas. Perdue played a part in this shift, which some would call a smart business move, while others criticize it as contributing to the hollowing out of American manufacturing jobs. Let's talk about outsourcing, because that's where Perdue's name often comes up. Outsourcing wasn't a dirty word in corporate America at the time, it was seen as the future. For businesses like Dollar General, where every penny saved mattered, moving production to places like China was like striking gold. Perdue was at the helm during this era, making decisions that lowered costs but also led to U.S. jobs moving overseas. For example, when Reebok needed to compete in the fierce world of sportswear, Chinese factories offered a way to make products more affordable for consumers while keeping the company profitable. Now, whether you see this as savvy leadership or as contributing to a broader economic problem depends on your perspective. From a business standpoint, outsourcing made perfect sense. It was efficient, cost-effective, and it kept companies afloat in a cutthroat market. But for American workers, it was a different story. Entire towns in the U.S. saw factories close and jobs disappear, replaced by production lines thousands of miles away. Here's the kicker: this experience gave Perdue a front-row seat to understanding how China operates. He's seen the mechanics of Chinese manufacturing, from the cost advantages to the scale and speed at which factories can deliver. He's dealt with Chinese suppliers, negotiated contracts, and navigated the logistical challenges of shipping goods halfway around the world. This isn't theoretical knowledge for him, it's hands-on, real-world experience. So, when Perdue talks about trade with China or criticizes its economic practices, it's not just political rhetoric. He's been in the trenches, working within the system that now shapes so much of the global economy. He knows the benefits China brings to the table, like its ability to churn out products at an unmatched pace, but he's also aware of the drawbacks, such as the dependency it creates and the toll it takes on American workers. In short, Perdue's corporate career is a double-edged sword. It gives him a deep understanding of the global economy, particularly China's central role in it. But it also ties him to the very practices, like outsourcing, that many Americans feel have hurt their communities. Whether that experience makes him a bridge between the U.S. and China or a critic with first-hand knowledge is what makes his journey so interesting. It's like he's holding a map of a complicated trade route, knowing all the shortcuts and pitfalls, and now he's being asked to navigate it in the high-stakes world of diplomacy. 2. Historical context: Perdue's complex stance on China. David Perdue's views on China have never been simple or one-dimensional. Over the years, he's built a reputation as someone who's willing to stand up to China, calling out its unfair trade practices and its growing influence in global markets. He's not one to shy away from making bold statements. But if you take a closer look at his comments and actions, you see a more nuanced approach, one that blends criticism with an understanding of the realities of doing business in and with China. Let's start with the tough side. During his time as a U.S. Senator, Perdue didn't hold back on his criticism of China. He was part of the wave of lawmakers who pointed to China's trade practices as a major problem for American businesses. He often spoke about how China was stealing intellectual property, manipulating its currency, and flooding the U.S. market with cheap goods that hurt American manufacturing. He's echoed the frustrations of many in the U.S. who feel that China plays by a different set of rules that tilt the playing field in its favor. For instance, in 2018, Perdue was very vocal about the U.S.-China trade war. He supported President Trump's decision to impose tariffs on Chinese goods, arguing that it was necessary to push China to the negotiating table. He even called the trade deficit with China unacceptable, reinforcing his view that the U.S. needed to stand firm against China's economic power. This rhetoric aligned him with the Trump administration's America First approach, which focused on confronting China over what were seen as unfair trade practices. But here's the twist: despite this tough talk, Perdue's corporate experience and understanding of the global supply chain tell a different story. As a businessman, he was no stranger to China's central role in the global economy. While he was criticizing China's trade practices, he also understood that China wasn't just a rival, it was a partner. He knew that U.S. companies, including those he worked for, were deeply embedded in China's manufacturing ecosystem. Companies like Reebok didn't just choose to outsource to China out of convenience, they did it because China offered unmatched production capabilities. And Perdue, with his years of experience in global supply chains, was well aware of that. He's even admitted in the past that you can't ignore China. While on one hand, he spoke about China's economic manipulation and its unfair advantage, on the other hand, he recognized that China was an unavoidable player on the global stage. That's the reality of the business world. In his Senate days, he said, China is the second largest economy in the world, and it's a central part of the global supply chain. For someone who had worked closely with Chinese factories and suppliers, this wasn't just a diplomatic talking point, it was a fact of life. This kind of nuance is also reflected in his relationship with the U.S.-China Business Council or USCBC, an organization that represents American companies operating in China. The USCBC has been quick to support Perdue's nomination to be the U.S. ambassador to China, citing his deep business experience. The council has praised him for understanding the importance of U.S.-China economic relations, even as he pushes for a tougher stance on trade. This isn't the kind of endorsement you typically get from a business group if you're all about confrontation. It speaks to Perdue's ability to balance criticism of China with the reality that cooperation is often necessary, especially when it comes to trade and investment. In fact, this balance is something he's had to deal with throughout his career. While he supported tariffs, which many view as confrontational, he also expressed a willingness to work with China on certain issues. He's made statements about how U.S. companies need to remain engaged with China, because, as he put it, if you're not in China, you're not in the game. It's a pragmatic view that recognizes China as both a competitor and a partner, something that many U.S. policymakers struggle with. Moreover, Perdue's cousin, Sonny Perdue, who served as the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, also had dealings with China during his time in office. Sonny worked hard to push U.S. agricultural products into the Chinese market, despite the trade war and the tariffs that were in place. The Perdue family's connection to China isn't just limited to David. Sonny's efforts to improve agricultural trade show how China can be both a challenge and an opportunity for the U.S. Perdue, both in business and in his political family, understands that these complicated relationships are often more about finding common ground than fighting over differences. So, when you put it all together, Perdue's stance on China is much more than just a series of speeches or policy proposals. His business career, his family ties, and his time in the Senate have all shaped a perspective that is as much about economic realities as it is about political principles. His view on China isn't black and white, it's about recognizing where the U.S. must challenge China, but also where it must engage, because the two countries' economies are so intertwined. Perdue's nuanced view of China, which combines both confrontation and cooperation, will likely be one of the defining aspects of his approach if he's confirmed as ambassador. 3. A nuanced diplomatic opportunity. Looking at David Perdue's nomination as U.S. ambassador to China, it's clear that he brings a complex blend of experience and perspectives to the table. He's not your typical ambassador candidate, someone who fits neatly into one box of pro-China or anti-China. His career, both in business and politics, has made him someone who understands the economic dynamics of China, while still being a vocal critic of its policies. His background in corporate America, particularly with companies like Reebok and Dollar General, has given him a first-hand understanding of China's role in the global economy. He knows that businesses, especially U.S. ones, can't just ignore China, its market and manufacturing power are too big to sidestep. But at the same time, he's well aware of the trade imbalances, intellectual property issues, and unfair competition that have been the focus of U.S. complaints against China for years. So, Perdue is in a unique position to speak the language of business, while also standing firm on issues that matter to American workers and companies. Take the trade war, for example. Perdue supported President Trump's tough stance on tariffs and has spoken out about the need to hold China accountable for practices that harm U.S. businesses. But he's also someone who recognizes the importance of engagement, especially when it comes to areas like agriculture, where the U.S. has long relied on China as a major market for its products. Perdue's cousin, Sonny Perdue, who served as Secretary of Agriculture, also had dealings with China to secure more market access for U.S. farm products, showing that even within the family, there's an understanding of the need for both competition and cooperation with China. China, however, will be watching closely. They'll want to see if Perdue sticks to the tough talk he's known for or if he can strike a balance between confronting China on its economic policies and finding areas for collaboration. Beijing's approach will likely be measured. In the beginning, expect a wait-and-see attitude from China, carefully assessing what kind of ambassador Perdue will be. If he moves forward with a hardline approach, especially on issues like trade and Taiwan, it's likely that China will respond cautiously, using diplomatic channels to express concerns without escalating tensions. But if he finds a way to tone down the rhetoric and focus on mutually beneficial areas of cooperation, such as trade agreements and regional stability, China could engage with him more openly. At the end of the day, Perdue's ability to navigate this delicate balance between competition and collaboration will define his success as ambassador. If he can use his business savvy to maintain pressure on China where needed, while also keeping the lines of communication open, he could serve as a bridge in what's often a very turbulent relationship. His understanding of both the challenges and the opportunities in US-China relations could make him a key figure in ensuring that the relationship remains stable, rather than spiraling into further conflict. So, whether he's a bulldog or a diplomat depends on how he handles the nuances of the job. One thing's for sure, he's not going to be a passive observer. His experience tells him that in diplomacy, as in business, it's all about understanding the players on the other side and figuring out how to engage, even when things get heated. If he can do that, he might just be the right person to manage one of the most critical relationships in global geopolitics today.